Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Scottish Land Commission's webinar on regional land use partnerships, delivering on the ground. I'm delighted to say that I think we've got nearly 70 of you joining us today, and we had about 118 signed up. So I think considering the sunshine that we've got here that is long overdue, I think there's a few people out putting silage on the ground or just taking advantage of the weather. So we will make a start. Thank you all for your time, for taking time out today. The purpose and structure of today's webinar is for myself, Harriet Donald, and I am the Regional Land Use Partnerships Project Manager for the Scottish Land Commission, to provide you with a background to the work that we have been doing on regional land use partnerships, our approach to the project, and then also talk you through the recommendations that we are making and what these could mean practically for those of you on the ground. I am then also joined today by two speakers to provide some real life examples and some inspiration as to the potential of what regional land use partnerships could deliver. Our first speaker is Kirsty Sweeney from Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park Authority, and she's going to be talking about partnership working and the Strathard Partnership. And our second speaker is Pauline Silverman from SEPA and the Leaving Programme, and she is going to be discussing the added value of involving communities in a land use partnership project. We will then finish up with a short panelist Q&A session, and I'm grateful to a number of you who have submitted questions in advance, which we will look to answer during this session. During the course of the webinar, if you've got any specific questions, if you can pop them in the Q&A function box. This is going to be monitored by my colleague Jess, who's sitting on the background and making sure all the technology hopefully works. And then we'll select a number of these to answer after the three speakers. Overall, the purpose of today is to engage further with stakeholders on our recommendations. So for the next few weeks, we're encouraging comment and questioning on these recommendations, and this will shape our thinking as we develop proposals towards publication of our final report at the beginning of September. So I'd therefore encourage you to engage further on this. As I've said, the purpose of today's webinar is to inform. So following this webinar, we'll be issuing a smart survey which will ask for comment and questions. And then also towards the end of this week, we are looking to put out a short summary version of our interim report with another accompanying survey, which again offers another opportunity for comment. There is a chat function here as well, so please feel free to sort of pop comment through that as we go, not specific questions. We will record that and pull any comments sort of into our thinking, but that won't be a two-way discussion function during this. So we'll just be sort of noting comments as we go. As I've said, your Q&A function box, which should be available to everybody, is there for specific questions for the Q&A session. So to get us started, I want to just set the scene and provide some background to the key driver for the development of regional land use partnerships. The Scottish Government's Programme for Government in 2019 included a commitment to develop proposals for regional land use partnerships. The intention is that the partnerships will develop a framework by 2023, and the overall purpose is to ensure that all parts of Scotland's land, that's both urban and rural, helps deliver ambitious climate change targets. The proposal for regional land use partnerships was first set out in Scotland's land use strategy, and then the Climate Change Act 2019 brought new momentum to this proposal. Land use and land use change is recognised as key to delivering Scottish Government and the UK's climate change targets for 2030 and 2045. So regional land use partnerships are proposed and recognised as a mechanism to do this. So to date, what is Scottish Land Commission's role and what are we doing? So the Scottish Land Commission was established under the Land Reform Act 2016, and our purpose is to provide direction, leadership and strategic thought to land reform in Scotland. The Scottish Land Commission has therefore been asked to advise ministers on the most effective ways to establish regional land use partnerships and what these might look like in practice. It's worth noting at this stage that the advice we are providing to government will take the form of principles, and these will then be used to inform their next stage of government thinking. So there has been to date, and I'm sure there'll be more questions today by stakeholders which are at a level of detail we're not getting into at the moment at this current stage, but we're happy to take these questions and sort of inform our thinking with these. So the approach that we've taken in developing the recommendations has been to firstly consider the high level asks that partnerships and frameworks need to deliver on, and then the setup of partnerships that are required to enable the and support this. So land use decisions affect everybody. And for me, in developing these proposals, it's been important that we make recommendations to either do something which isn't currently happening on the ground or makes what we are doing much more efficient and effective. I also think that any proposals we make actually deliver, and they don't just add to a busy strategic planning environment for those at implementation level, so communities, land managers. And also that what we propose doesn't just create multiple meetings and paper documents, but actually delivers something practical and tangible on the ground. So with this in mind, we identified that partnerships and their frameworks need to deliver a step change in the way land use decisions are made, delivering outcomes on the ground at an improved pace and scale, and that meet the challenge of climate and environment targets. Along with this, we've identified a governance structure which will be required to ensure that partnerships have impact and actually influence, and as well as improve openness and accountability to make decisions and drive forward change. We've identified a need for regional land use partnerships to integrate efficiently and effectively with existing strategies and other regional planning mechanisms, of which there are many. So we want regional land use partnerships to integrate and not just add in complication or additional bureaucracy. And so we've considered how they could work most effectively with other regional economic partnerships, spatial strategies, national planning frameworks. And ultimately, the direction of travel has been set that regional land use partnerships are set up to proactively deliver on opportunity and create a much more sort of collaborative, dynamic approach. They're not just a talking shop, and meet these ambitious targets. So in practice, what will a regional land use partnership do? We have proposed that a regional land use partnership will engage people in land use opportunities, priorities and choice, and will do this through the development of a land use framework. Their core function will be to develop collaboratively and in an engaging process this framework, which will set out the opportunities and priorities for land use in a region. And these will relate closely to national, regional and local priorities, and then decide how these are delivered in practice. We also think that regional land use partnerships should prioritise and target significant public funding. So this includes some parts of post-cap funding. And for example, the partnership could manage funds for nature, climate change and rural development. This aspect for us ensures that partnerships will have a practical impact, and I'll come back. I've already said, we don't want them to just be a talking shop. And it will also allow that people locally have a say over how these funds are spent and prioritised in a region. We think that regional land use partnerships should work through local delivery mechanisms such as collaborative landscape scale initiatives, deer management groups, and existing community-led initiatives to deliver practical activities. And the idea to bring them all together will allow delivery in a much more sort of joined up manner in a region and have that landscape scale impact. We also think that regional land use partnerships are set up in such a way that have an appropriate governance structure to draw in wider funding beyond public funds, and that can deliver environmental and wider public benefits. And then we finally recommended that they are statutory in their approach and are given weight in this manner with other planning policy processes, and then have the ability to inform and influence decision making, not just in policy, but also incentives, regulatory mechanisms, and management practice. So what area the regional land use partnership cover? We've had quite a bit of discussion on this to date, and there's been a lot of different views about this amongst stakeholders, with pros and cons for physical geography boundaries such as catchments, but also administrative boundaries. We've considered the practical implications of the different options and the overall drivers of regional land use partnerships, and therefore are proposing that the partnerships cover the same area as planning authorities. So there's 32 local authorities in Scotland and the 2 national parks. Our reasoning for this recommendation is that local authorities are well recognised, they're understood, and they also have clear routes to democratic accountability. Using these boundaries is replicated in other spatial planning and economic strategies, so it will provide greater opportunity for alignment. And it also should help to bring together rural land use planning with urban. And for a long time, rural land use decision making has been approached separately, and we think there's significant advantages to bringing the two much closer together. So who will be on a regional land use partnership? We are proposing a partnership board to lead the regional land use partnerships, and we think this will ensure relevant expertise around the table, accountability, and the involvement of a range of voices. For us, the individuals would include the following representatives on your screen. So that's government representatives from local and national government, which will ensure democratic accountability and also then connection with local and national policy. Sectoral expertise, so people with specialist expertise in areas such as land management, business or rural development. Community representatives, so people with relevant experience and community networks who can bring a wide range of perspectives to the board. It's currently proposed that government representatives would be via nomination, and then experts and community members recruited through an open recruitment and selection process. Each partnership would be underpinned by an accountable body, and they would be the lead organisation for running the partnership, which is similar to the leader governance model. So this could be a public body, a local authority, or a national park, or even a third sector body who's well established in the region. It's worth noting as we go through this, I'm sure people have got comment on a number of the recommendations we've made or want to draw on your own experience to add into the conversation. So a lot of this information is drawn from our interim report, and throughout that we've also highlighted areas for further consideration on some of this detail. So for example, how selection of representatives is made or nomination routes. So please feel free to come back to us on these areas. So next, I want to talk about how could individuals get involved with regional land use partnerships. The partnerships will adopt best practice in engaging communities of place and interest in their development of the frameworks, and that's something that we've strongly emphasised in the interim report. And that engagement doesn't only take place at the outset, so in the creation of the framework, but through design, delivery, and then evaluation of activities that have taken place. So engagement should be ongoing, and frameworks should be a working document with the overarching aim that partnerships basically build communities that are invested in the design and delivery of activities on the ground and land use decision making. So whether you are a land manager, an agent, a community representative, or a public body employee, everyone has their role to play. for regional land use partnerships to work most successfully and deliver to the best of their ability, everyone has to play their part and engage. So in terms of implementation, we are expecting and recommending a phased approach to developing regional land use partnerships and taking a real-time learning approach in how they're developed from the start. We think that flexibility will be needed for different parts of Scotland to develop partnerships fitting with their local circumstances. So there shouldn't be a sort of one size fits all approach. We're recommending early adopters approach to implementation. So in areas that are sort of ready to go, have a number of strategies in place, partnerships can be established quickly. But then we're also looking to take sort of a learn and feedback approach as we go into wider programme rollout. We've also recognised that some parts of Scotland don't have the capacity to get up and going straight away, and we think that there should be existing supportive strategies in place in these areas so that they don't lose out. So that is a quick 20-minute overview. I'm trying to keep to time so that we're not all sat here well past 4 o'clock, of the recommendations that we're making, both for the setup of regional land use partnerships, their purpose and structure, and how they could be relevant to you. I think it's worth pointing out that we have had a lot of good stakeholder support for the partnerships to date. And for me, I think this is a hugely exciting opportunity for land use planning, and in particular, rural land use. I've always believed that multiple heads are better than one. And I think if we can set up a partnership approach to land use decision making and delivery that enables, but also supports and drives collaborations where you can then build communities interest and place, which deliver innovation and change, and that's what everybody wants as we go forward. So in terms of next steps of the Scottish Land Commission project and timescales for comment, on the 16th of July, we published our interim report, and that outlined a lot more of what I've gone through today. And as I've said, also asked for comment on a number of highlighted remaining key issues for consideration. Timeline for comment on these is by 7th of August. And we're aware there's quite a lot in this report. So we've also been asked to publish a summary document which will come out with a survey Q&A function, which we're hoping to put out by the end of this month. This again will have a fairly short time scale, so we will be looking for completion of this by mid-August. And then we're looking to draw together our final recommendations, which are supported by some external areas of work, which I've detailed on the slide here, which will then draw all our work together to provide final advice to ministers in September. At the end of the presentation is details for contacting me, and I'm more than happy to sort of have one-to-one conversations in this regard. But as I've said, there will also be surveys put out for you to come back and comment on. So for now, I'm hoping I've provided you with an overview of the recommendations. I've seen the chat function and the Q&A function flashing at me as I've been trying to talk to you. So I will now hand over to the speakers. I think it's always good in these instances to hear from people who are actually delivering on the ground. So I'm going to first of all hand over to Kirsty.
Thank you, Harriet. I'm Kirsty Sweeney. I work for the Development Planning and Communities team at the National Park Authority. So I'm going to talk to you today about the inception and work of the Strathard Strategic Partnership. Next slide, Harriet. And next one again, sorry. That's us. So Strathard lies at the heart of the National Park. It's a community council area. Sorry, back one, Harriet. And it covers approximately 100 kilometres square. The area lies within the Trossachs and is part of the headwaters of the River Forth catchment, stretching from the town of Aberfoyle towards Ben Lomond. There's numerous lochs and there's lots of heavily forested glens and lots of mountains, peaks. The area is relatively sparsely populated, but it's a popular tourist destination just north of Glasgow. So, slide over over the past years, partnerships between public bodies, environmental NGOs, local communities in Strathard sprung up and evolved as a result of various and changing drivers. Partnerships are often most effective when there is a clear and common cause for stakeholders to come together and focus on. And in this case, and in this area, it was flooding. That was the first common cause. Harriet, can you move forward a couple of slides to the initiative slide? So Strathard Initiative was set up. It is an environmental project formed in 2015 to create a multi-agency ecosystem services approach to explore how the integration of natural, land and water management practices could benefit the wider environment at a landscape scale. As part of this project, a community survey. Sorry, could you go back a few slides, Harriet, because it's on the project initiative. Swap back as well. Thank you. As part of this project, a community survey raised awareness of the importance of land use and land management to local settlements. The outputs included a community action plan, a video using local people to talk about their place, but also technical GIS outputs and mapping. So forward 2 slides, I think. We're on slide 6 now. Again, move forward.
Sorry, Kirsty and everyone, we're just having a small, is that the right slide?
Yes, that's the right slide.
Brilliant. Okay.
So following that initial environmental project, there was other drivers that became a catalyst for the birth of this current Strathard strategic partnership, which you can now see on your screen there. It was formed in March 2018 to drive forward both land use and planning projects that had come out of the initiative, but also some new projects, because other issues were coming into focus, such as the decline of the high street in Aberfoyle and issues around declining and ageing population and resistance to inappropriate new development. So the slide shows the range of stakeholders involved, and the group started to meet in March 2018 quarterly and is still running today. The projects discussed and driven through this group have been wide-ranging, and I'll run through a few of them just now. Okay, so the first one here, just move on forward 1 slide. In February 2018, Benban Management Plan was prepared in a completely new way by Forest and Land Scotland, who are one of the partners. The plan was developed in close cooperation with the Strathard community, and 6 community representatives were selected to represent a range of interests. These were the Community Council, the Development Trust and the local heritage groups. And I've provided a link there if anyone's interested. So next slide, for natural flood management, which was one of the key issues early on, hydrological studies and opportunity mapping coordinated by Forest Research enabled the partnership to identify a 5-year demonstration project on one of the tributaries to the River Forth. There was also research into areas of peatland restoration potential, and work is underway with one of the landowners. And Sterling Kill, who's one of the new partners, was producing their engineering flood in the village centre. Next slide. An invasive non-native species strategy was also developed by the Park Authority, and it involved the partnership, and it has allowed funding bids to be successful for various invasive species eradication projects, including rhododendron across the area. Next slide. So there was also discussions on deer and goat management as a key issue in the area, and the partnership has helped raise the awareness of this issue with the community, and now there's been an establishment of a new management forum on East Loch Lomond, and the forum are now considering how they can involve the community in their new management plan. Next slide. So also alongside the land management work, There was also other work, economic and planning. So the Community Trust project was well underway when the partnership was set up, and it involved the appointment of a tourism and economic development officer using leader funding. And there was lots of successful mini projects, which I've kind of highlighted on that slide. And the final output was a Strathard tourism and economic strategy to take things forward in the area. Next slide. Another project that the community set up was the Business Hub in 2018, and it was working in partnership with Stirling Council again, and using underutilised office space above the Tourist Information Centre in Aberfoyle, and it now provides excellent co-working space, meeting rooms and Freetown Wi-Fi. So next slide. So with the threat of inappropriate development and with the community awareness raised on various planning and land use issues due to the Strathard initiative, they were incentivised to prepare their own plan to ensure their voices were heard. The life plans, as you can see here, cover everything from how the community value the area, their desires and wishes for land use, and also community project ideas in the spirit of community empowerment. In both communities, it is clear they greatly value their natural environment and wish to be involved in land management decisions and in planning. Next slide. So we're now working on a joint framework for the area. It's both a land use framework but also planning guidance. It's an area strategy to provide more proactive planning response, and it's a co-design approach that we're taking to produce this. We've been working closely now with the Community Council, Development Trust and Stirling Council to bring this together. So where are we at the moment? We've had one workshop in March, but the next one that we were meant to hold has been postponed. So we've been developing 5 sub-areas which we need to have a final place-based discussion to get down to exactly the where and how the projects will happen and the priorities that everyone feels should be in the frameworks. So just some closing remarks on the benefits of the partnership. There is no doubt the partnership keeps the momentum going and stimulates new ideas and ways forward. There are so many pieces of work that would not be happening or would be a lot further behind if it wasn't for the partnership in Strathard. We are progressing this work in a genuine co-design way and have developed such strong working relationships with the community, and without this the work we feel would not be as successful. So we feel that regional land use partnership need to be based on this spirit of cooperation and shared purpose, similar to Strathard's work. And that's me finished. I'll pass back over. I think it's Pauline next.
Thank you, Kirsty, and bearing with me on the slides which shuffled between automated and me controlling them. Right, I'll now hand over to Pauline Silverman, and she is going to discuss her experience in the Leave-In programme and her role on this and the added value of the community partnership approach. Thanks.
Thanks, Harriet. Thanks, everyone. I must admit, until a week ago, I'd never heard of a regional land use partnership. So it's quite interesting to hear what's going on and how close perhaps we've got to setting one up maybe. So I work for SEPA. I'm a regulator in water regulation. I spent the last 10 years working on water resources, hydro regulation. So this is quite a different project for me, quite a different approach. If you could just flick forward onto the slides, please, Harriet, that'd be great. So the Leave-In programme, this is the Leave-In in Mid-Fife. I don't know how many of you are aware of it. You're probably quite aware of Loch Leave-In. So you've got Loch Leave-In at the top here. It's an awful lot of work gone into this to making this an area, a go-to area. It's got a route round it now. It's a great destination for people. But at the polar opposite extreme of this, not too far downstream and completely connected by the water environment, is Leave-In Mouth, and in between that is Glenrothes. And you can see here there's a cut that was put back in a couple of hundred years ago to drain land for agricultural use. There were 200-300 mills along this stretch of the river back in the Victorian era. Since they've gone, the the whole area, pretty much from down here, has gone into decline. It's quite evident from statistics, SMID, that, you know, especially in Leavenmouth, Methil, Buckhaven, it's a complete polar opposite to this area up here. Now, SEPA had a job to do in this area. There's multiple pressures, as you'd imagine, historic pressures from the old industrial uses along this site, along this river. And actually, these are where the communities are. These were the hubs around which communities grew. Mining down here, then you had your ports, and then, like I say, all the mills and the agricultural use. Used to be a very healthy salmon river. Obviously now there's loads of historical barriers and still barriers that are operational as well, just now supporting distilleries and mills and hydro schemes. So what was our role? Our role usually is to go in and regulate, and I'd like to say that we work in partnership with those we regulate. I think that would be quite an optimistic view to take, and that's how we try to work. But it was very clear to me when I was asked to look at the pressures here that we had to take a different approach, because actually people down here don't have access to their environment. There was no way to get to the river down here. Even in Glenrothes, there was limited access. The development plan had the river greyed out. The environment was not seen as an asset. Up here it is, and historically it was, but not anymore. New housing developments were being built with fences to stop people accessing the river, actively stopping them access it. And in some cases, to get across the communities, you had to walk a couple of miles. And actually, it's not safe, it's not pretty. So for us to go in and remove barriers and try and fix issues along there seemed to me very, not a great use of our resource, and not very rewarding, I have to say, as a person trying to make environmental improvements. So, and you know, primarily for me, it's important that every person has a right to access a clean and safe environment. You know, if we talk about climate change, we talk about keeping, you know, we're net zero, everything else. Actually, if you go down to Leavenmouth and try and talk to people about those things, you're not going to get them engaged. So we knew we had to take a different approach to engagement with communities and our partners. So we set up a sustainable growth agreement. This is something that SEPA has brought in to try and work differently in collaboration with organisations, with folk we regulate, and with communities. Sorry, next slide, please, Harriet. So how did we start the conversation? And I think for me, the success of this so far has been the language we use. If I go in and talk about WFD classification or fish barrier removal or even migratory salmon, people switch off. Some people switch off. I know a lot of you wouldn't switch off. But it needs to be a language that's shared. There needs to be a mandate for people to work together, that common goal, that shared outcome, and it has to speak to the people who live there. It has to come from community needs. So where is that? You don't have to go too high up in any of our organisations to have that shared language. And we kind of put together, we tried to group things in. So we've got your placemaking, decarbonisation and inclusive growth. Now around here are just some of the sustainable development goals and the national performance indicators. These are the kind of things that within most of the partners we're aiming for. You can see down the left-hand side, that's 15 of the partners who've signed up so far to the Sustainable Growth Agreement. There's a lot of other partners there. There's a lot of community organisations, a lot of private companies as well that are wanting to join up. But primarily, these people sit on a board that we've set up to make sure that the direction and the vision is strong. Again, that language has to be simple, it has to be shared, and it has to be exciting. That narrative that we created from that community, that environment that held people together, where people grew up, where they grew around, is that industrial, that social heritage has to be part of it. And we use that, you know, that sort of high carbon environment that these communities grew around to that almost dereliction in some places, you know. So how we build on that, and we don't forget that because that's a real sense of pride still there within communities. Sorry, next slide, please. So it's a very simple approach we're taking, because actually when you go to areas where there's multiple deprivation and there's massive issues for all those organisations that are partners, there's never nothing happening. There's loads of stuff going on. So how do we get a feeling for that and start to organise ourselves better? I mean, I think that the key thing for partnership working is trying to be organised, communication, understanding what your partner's remit is, understanding what their constraints are, and looking for duplication and added benefit. We have got a group of, we've tried to group our projects together into themes. So for instance, nature rich projects, so that's your sort of land use that covers everything really, in terms of that. Connectivity projects, now we've got £750,000 from Sustrans. SEPA applied for that. It's not something we'd normally do, to look at creating a network of paths around the river down in Leavenmouth, and we are looking at the river restoration. So instead of us just looking at river restoration in isolation, we are trying to open up the path network in there to allow communities to get to that river to appreciate it. That's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to have a path network that goes from Leavenmouth right up to Loch Leven, amongst other things. But we've tried to make every outcome, and we've tried to make sure that everything we do to get to that is engagement, and it's engagement driven. So every opportunity we've got to involve the college, the youth groups there, to bring in people and communities to help them deliver the engagement for us, and to actually fund that through the money we get from Sustrans instead of us doing it, has been very important. So again, trying to just make sure that we just draw together within those themes the project. So it's like a mapping exercise within a geographic area. It doesn't have to be completely tied to the catchment, you know. Next slide, please. So the themes, this is quite important, I've found, for a lot of the partners. They need to have a mandate, they need to understand what they're in there for and what these themes will deliver for them. In most cases, you know, I guess a lot of this, in terms of this slide, is a tool. It's a tool to reassure people and to encourage organisations that this isn't an extra resource that's needed. This is actually our job, and it's in an area that we've already prioritised or we've already seen has multiple issues. So if it needs be, this could be used for funders, but you know, this is also used, used to actually ensure that each organisation is delivering or potentially reprioritising what they need to do in that area. We've got leads within the partnership who've stepped up and said they'll take lead of it. So Nature Rich has got SNH along with CSGNT, Five Coast and Countryside Trust, and multiple third sector groups. We've got decarbonisation and net zero. In that we've got Five Council, Diageo, the Coal Authority. Basically organisations, you know, the Coal Authority are looking at geothermal, so are Five Council, so is SEPA. And we weren't really communicating very well. And also we might have multiple projects that, you know, with a bit of tweaking could actually be grouped together and deliver a whole lot more. So next slide, please. So this is really a tool for us that we're developing. This has got many names. We'll let you all make up your own name for it. But anyway, once we really map out the projects, what's going on in the catchment, and try and group them within those themes, we then need to show what they're delivering to. So we, you know, your high level strategic outcomes, whether you go right back up to sustainable development goals or decarbonisation, or whether you take it to your own organisation's level, here we've thought it was really important to show the multiple benefits and added value of these projects. So for example, the connectivity project here, that's our Sustrans funded project looking at the path network and the river parks. Now that we feel will deliver health and wellbeing benefits, heritage, water innovation, we're looking at natural flood management, resilient communities, productive people in place. So all these things that we are making sure, this is almost a checklist for us to make sure that we deliver on all those. It could be that some projects don't deliver or we don't think they do, so that might be okay, or that may be just a key for us to say, right, hang on a minute, we need to start looking at that, and maybe if we bring in some other partners, we could add value to this project. The next slide, please. So how are we going to organise our work? We are going to have this mapping exercise. Each theme lead is going to run workshops. We'll just try and scope out exactly what's going on in the area, try and group them under those themes. It may be, and you know, a lot of the time there will be small projects. They may seem like small projects, but actually in our head we are having a view to how they could be scaled up and how the partnership could support that. So it may be that we could take a number of small projects and umbrella them, or support communities to umbrella them, and then look at how we could scale them up. And then it doesn't take too long to scale up that to your strategic transformational placemaking projects. So we've got an example here, which is a river length heritage assessment Fife Council are going to carry out for us, looking at all the, you know, the historic and heritage opportunities right down the river. That could be scaled up into citizen science projects, and then you start to bring in more activity, and you add to the partnership, and again up to the land use scale. Another example of this, I guess, Diageo is looking at doing their Alliance for Water Stewardship accreditation, looking at sustainable water use within their unit, so within their site, which in itself may be small, but we could then as a partnership look at scaling that up, looking at other significant water users in the area and get them to look at undertaking that. And then before you know it, you could be scaling up to something that covers climate adaptation with not very much effort. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. So as part of all this, I'm very aware that we have to monitor and measure success, because, you know, like I say, we've all had lots of experience working in partnerships. We have had a consultant draw this up for us. It's not finished yet, but basically we'll take each theme and we will measure efficiencies. A lot of this already, we've got savings from where we've worked across with Network Rail and their hydrologists looking at the flood risk assessment for the introduction of the rail link to Leavenmouth, where we've managed to work with them to tweak that model so we can use it for our river restoration, and Fife Council can use it for their flood risk assessments for Glenrothes and Leavenmouth. We need to measure all those. Where we find duplication, rule that out. We need to make sure that there's one person reporting, and also that we're picking the best baseline and the most sensible baseline. So that's a very quick whistle stop tour of where we are on the Leaving programme just now. Thanks, Harriet.
Thank you, Pauline. That was fascinating. Excuse me. Thank you to you both. I thought I asked Pauline to speak today because I think it's a really interesting approach that she's taken. And I remember when I had a conversation with her a week, 10 days ago, and she said that the success of the partnership has been based as much on the process and the engagement that's come out of that as the outcome, and that it's all, you know, her approach is a lot about added value. So it's sort of delivering environmental gain, but then the added value to the communities that comes with it. And I thought it was a really quite an inspirational approach, and one that I really want to sort of take as we develop the thinking for regional land use partnerships. So that was great to hear. And thank you also, Kirsty, for talking about the Strathard partnership. Again, really interesting to hear how sort of the flooding issue was quite a catalyst for bringing people together and developing this partnership approach, and then the successes that have come from this and delivered a real change in an area. So I'm now going to move on to question and answers, and I'm trying to navigate through 3 different screens, sort of behind the scenes here. So I'm hoping it's going to work. I'm aware of time, so it's 4:45, so we'll spend sort of 10 minutes or so answering questions. It looks like a good number. I've also seen there's quite a bit of chat going on as well, which I've tried to stay on top of, as well as moving slides, which you might have noticed. So we will, as I said, we'll take the chat into consideration afterwards when we look through all the comments, but for now we'll try and answer some of the Q&As. So I had a couple sent in advance, which I'm happy to go through. Jess, I think you were going to try and pop some of them up as well so people could see if that's possible. So the first question that came in was asking, to what extent has the work of collaborative landscape scale deer management, as demonstrated by deer management groups, been taken into consideration when discussing regional land use partnerships? It has been taken into account, is the first answer. We are looking at all existing initiatives that are ongoing at the moment in Scotland, looking for lessons learned approaches, and also the positives to come out of that, and building that into the recommendations that we are building. University of Edinburgh are working on a specific project for us in this regard. We then have had a couple of questions around process and procedure to resolve or rectify issues arising. I'll read one out because it's just easier. So, how will regional land use partnerships be accountable when dealing with tension or disagreement between involved parties? Where a decision or outcome is contested, will there be a resource to an arbitration mechanism to resolve the issue, for example, the land courts? I think this is quite an interesting perspective, and the reason I wanted to address this is the purpose of regional land use partnerships is not to inform how land or dictate how land is managed. I've seen also on the Q&As there's a comment about a body overseeing how land is managed, and this is not the purpose. It is very much a partnership approach to engage and collaborate and bring people around the table to make land use decision making, both urban and rural, just more efficient, and bringing in community initiatives, whether that is aligning with invasive non-native work that's happening in an area that can be rolled across different sites, but just bringing things together, making it more efficient, bringing more people around the table, and having a better, more involved conversation. It is not about telling people what to do on their land. So I think it's an interesting perspective, and it's one that we'll use to shape our thinking. But at the moment, we haven't detailed a recourse to an arbitration mechanism, because it is not the overall purpose of regional land use partnerships. And then there was also a question about how priorities for each partnership is determined. Would it be by the individuals on the board, or group, or another? Again, I would go back to sort of the comment discussion we've had around engagement and setting priorities, and this being collaborative engagement process. And I wonder if I could just ask Pauline and Kirsty perhaps to comment a little bit just on their process on deciding priorities in their areas, and just a very light sort of comment on how you decided priorities for your area.
Do you want me to go first, Kirsty? Yeah, our priorities are being driven fundamentally, I hope, by community need. There's been a lot of pre-work done by Vibe Council. There's been previous charrettes. These communities have often been over-consulted, to be honest. That aside, each organisation comes to the table with their own objectives there, and the assumption is that we're doing our day job well, and what we're bringing to the table is that added value.
Yeah. Well, I just come in. Yeah, similar in Strathard as well. It's obviously driven by the flooding issue there, but and you know that the drivers in that sense set the priorities, as well as things like the Aberfoyle Main Street. So they set you know the priorities, but at the same time, the process that we're going through just now to create this framework for the area will actually in itself help us determine more clearly the kind of longer term priorities for the area up to kind of 2050 time scale, and look at it in a longer term view, not just the short term projects that are really what the partnership are kind of overseeing at the moment. So the framework that we're working on in the next workshop really is going to take us to that next stage of setting those priorities, which is quite exciting, because you know we're bringing a lot of people together, you know, a big group of about 25 to 30 people to kind of try and sort out and decide what these priorities are in a collaborative way. So Harriet, back to you.
Thanks, Kirsty. It's probably also worth highlighting, I posted on one of the slides that we're looking at international experience. So we've got some consultants working, and we're looking at how regional land use plans are developed internationally and the process they go through to develop those priorities and the engagement process with the communities. So we are drawing on a range of experiences both in Scotland and internationally. I'm going to go back to the Q&A function, and I've seen that there's a handy like tool which allows you all to sort of like the questions and move them up the list to draw them to my attention, which is helpful. So I'm going to go, there's a comment about, will regional land use partnerships be part of the development of the refreshed Scottish land use strategy? So regional land use partnerships were first mooted in the land use strategy. So we are waiting sort of whether on the steer, we're putting our advice to ministers, and it will be up to government to decide whether these are integrated into the new land use strategy. Another question on how regional land use partnerships will integrate with National Planning Framework 4 and Scottish planning policy. This is very much a point that we are trying to make for this integration. We're in conversation with Scottish Government planning colleagues on this, and it's recommended that to get sort of bring the rural urban land use planning divide that there might be sometimes at the moment sort of more aligned and get integration but also efficiency. So the regional spatial strategies that are coming out of National Planning Framework 4 are going to be setting sort of strategic priorities for regions. I don't think those strategic priorities need to then be replicated in a regional land use planning framework 4. If they've been set for a region, the framework can then work on actually making delivery of those happening. We don't need two different strategies saying the same thing. So yes, there is very much recommendation that those two things come together. Again, comment about overruling decisions, local national government, or will a regional land use partnership be overruled on decisions by local or national government? In our interim report, we have made recommendation that they are devolving decision making to a local level, but there is still a need for them to reflect national priorities. So it is actually one of the areas that we have asked for further comment on and consulting with stakeholders on about how that balance can be reached between local level decision making and the reflecting of national priorities. So we would welcome comment and discussion on this. Right, I'm just one aware of time, 53. I think I've commented quite a bit on what happens if needs are different, or if there's just, and again, I think because there's been so much comment on if priorities are different between the local land managers' aspirations or community, this isn't something actually that we have brought into our thinking in the current interim report, but it is something that will inform as we work at the final recommendations. There was something about, will a partnership board specifically include representation of young people or youth voice? And I'm going to come back to Pauline and Kirsty on this. I think we'll pick this up as our last question as we near 4 o'clock. We have put in the interim report that engagement and sort of inclusivity, we haven't specified specific sectors, so young people, youth voice, and we have made the recommendation that regional land use partnerships engage in terms of best practice. But Pauline and Kirsty, I'm just wondering whether you have any specific voice, so young people, for example, on your partnership boards.
Yeah, we have been doing a lot of work with young people. So at Fife College, 3 of the courses have adopted aspects of the programme into their curriculum. So the games design, app development, 3D reality, think they're the same course, and their design. So our logo, because we wanted to have a shared logo because there's multiple organisations, that was all designed by students. So they pitched like they would have to if they were out in the marketplace. And our logo was designed by a 19-year-old student at Fife College. Part of getting that logo there was the process of doing that, of going to speak to the kids about what we were trying to do, and for them to interpret that in design. And the app design, they're looking at applications that will be of use to people out walking, running along the river. As part of our path consultation, we've brought them in to do that. We've hooked them up with network rails, so there's an area of vacant and derelict land that the 3D virtual reality course is looking at, working with network rail to look at options like what would freight look like on this site and to visualise that. We've been working with the schools and the community via the community manager and other groups that already exist there, obviously. And we are running a pilot in East Methil Primary School in outdoor education. It basically came about during COVID and that sort of need for blended education, but it's something that we're looking at in that project scale that could be scaled up into programme and perhaps something wider as we move forward.
Great, thank you, Pauline. Kirsty, have you got anything on that?
Well, just in terms of, I suppose, set up slightly different. The Community Council is the representative body on the partnership, but they are extremely, good at involving the youth in their processes. As I said, they produced their 2 life plans for the area. They've got a separate youth group who were heavily involved in preparing those life plans. So we're confident we have that involvement, and also previously with the initiative and the writing of the community action plan, again, the youth groups were all consulted and the primary school was engaged. So yeah, it's part of this process, but it has been interesting that we have talked about bringing on a youth member into the kind of co-design group for the framework. Unfortunately, the person we've been trying to get hold of hasn't fitted with their times and scales, but we hope to get someone on the group, that an actual youth representative. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Kirsty. Okay, I think that is us probably at time. So I think what just remains to say is thank you both, Pauline and Kirsty, very much for contributing today. It's much appreciated. I want to also say thank you to Jess, whose name you might have seen floating in the background, who has sort of kept today on the road and kept the technology working. And then I also want to just say thank you, everyone, for your time in attending and feeding into the conversation in terms of your questions and your comment. I know there's a number of comments or questions that haven't been picked up, but please be aware that we will be taking these and reviewing them and feeding them into sort of the next 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks of work that we're doing on this. And I hope it's been useful to you. On the slide, I'll just highlight again sort of timescales and opportunities to engage with us on this work. I really would welcome direct contact and discussion or feed in through the sort of survey questions. So please feel free to send me an email or pick up the phone. I'm more than happy to discuss the proposals further with anybody. Yeah, please engage with us as we move this forward. So all that's left to say, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your afternoon. Thank you.